All right, let's start with a serious question. And I'm dead serious because this could be controversial. What is your favorite fried chicken? KFC, Popeyes, or are you a Chick-fil-A person? Whatever your answer, and I'm not here to judge, did you know that there's a fried chicken war going on right now? Americans spend over $60 billion a year on fried chicken alone. $60 billion. That's more than the entire GDP of some countries. And the competition is brutal. These big players are spending hundreds of millions of dollars on marketing, all fighting to become your go-to chicken spot. But what if I told you there's a fried chicken chain that's been hiding in plain sight in America for over 25 years, and most Americans still have no idea that it exists? It's been quietly building its US presence since 1998. And now it just launched its first US franchise location in Queens, New York last year in an aggressive plan to reach 500 locations across the US and Canada within the next few years. And what if I told you it's not an American brand? Its name is Jollibee, and it's Filipino. And it's quietly become a $3.3 billion global empire, buying up American food brands, opening restaurants on 5 continents, and building one of the most emotionally devoted customer bases of any food company on earth. People don't just like Jollibee, they cry at Jollibee openings, at a fast food restaurant. So what is it about Jollibee that triggers this kind of reaction? Is it the friendly-looking bee mascot? Or does the chicken taste like nothing you've ever had before? I've tried Jollibee because, surprise, surprise, I love fried chicken. And honestly, it doesn't taste dramatically different from KFC or Popeyes in terms of sheer quality. And before you send me death threats, it still tastes pretty good, but at the end of the day, it's fast food. I'm just saying the difference in quality alone might not be what's driving people to tears when they see Jollibee. And if you've never heard of Jollibee, just ask any Filipino you know, and they'll tell you that Jollibee is not just a fast food chain. In the Philippines, it has more locations and more customers than McDonald's, KFC, and every other foreign fast food brand in the country combined. But here's the thing. When we started digging into how Jollibee is pulling this off in America, one of the most competitive fast food markets on earth, what we found was not the story I expected. And what they're secretly planning for the global takeover might honestly be one of the smartest master plans any company in the world should be studying right now. A master plan that makes total sense once you see it, but one you won't see coming until the end of this video. And the bigger question for me, as someone who's genuinely curious about how great companies and brands are built, is whether any of this could actually be replicated. Could another brand from another country with a complete different story pull off exactly what Jollibee is doing? Or does everything outside of your control, like the timing, the history, and the cultural shift, have to perfectly align for this to ever work at all? Let's dive in. Before we get into fried chicken wars and billion-dollar acquisitions, let me tell you about a boy from a Chinese immigrant family growing up in Davao City. It's a city at the far southern end of the Philippines, far from Manila, the capital, and far from anywhere a Western viewer might recognize from a travel brochure. Chinese immigrants have been in the Philippines for centuries, ever since the Spanish colonial era. So this boy was Chinese Filipino, or Chinoy as they're commonly called in the Philippines. Before he was even a teenager, he was already cleaning tables and washing dishes. He watched his father cook and watched his mother count the day's earnings and try to make the numbers work. He was the third of 7 children, and according to his mother, the most difficult child to raise because he was too picky about food. Despite growing up in a household where you ate what was in front of you, he refused to eat things that didn't taste exactly right to him. His name was Tony Tan Caktiong, and he would go on to create the most Filipino brand in history. He was Filipino enough to love the food, the culture, the warmth, but he was also Chinese enough that belonging wasn't automatic. It had to be earned. And that most annoying quality his mother complained about, it turned out to be his greatest professional asset because he would spend the rest of his life obsessing over the precise flavor of every single item on his menu. Tony studied chemical engineering at the University of Santo Tomas in Manila. a degree that pointed towards a stable, respectable career. But everything changed during a visit to a Magnolia dairy ice cream plant where he noticed a poster on the wall advertising franchise opportunities. So in 1975, within months of graduating university, Tony put down 350,000 Philippine pesos of his family savings, roughly 48,000 US dollars at the time, which was a significant sum for an immigrant family running a restaurant in Davao. He signed the franchise agreement with Magnolia Dairy and opened 2 small ice cream parlors, both in Metro Manila. That's right, the $3.3 billion global empire we're talking about today didn't even start as Jollibee. It started as 2 ice cream shops run by a 22-year-old Chinese Filipino with zero business experience. So how did they go from ice cream to fried chicken and burgers? Simple. Customers kept asking for hot food, consistently. They would come in, order ice cream, and then ask, "Hey, do you have anything hot, like sandwiches, burgers, something to actually eat?" Tony listened. He added sandwiches, then hamburgers. And within a short time, the hot food was outselling the ice cream so dramatically that the ice cream had become almost an afterthought. That in 1977, the global oil crisis spiked the price of dairy ingredients, and that was the final push Tony needed. He discontinued the ice cream franchise and converted both parlors into full fast food restaurants. He was 24 years old, betting everything on the idea that Filipinos wanted burgers more than they wanted ice cream. And so began the official era of Jollibee, formally incorporated in January 1978. The name is a combination of Jolly and Bee, a bee that's always buzzing, making something good out of constant effort, hard work and sweetness, optimism and productivity. If you're ever in the Philippines and you ask somebody what Jollibee means to them, that's exactly what they'll tell you. As for the iconic mascot, Tony brought in a marketing consultant named Manuel Lumba to help build the brand. It was Lumba who landed on the idea of a bee inspired by his 6-year-old daughter's comic books. And look, the mascot looks iconic now, but when it was first introduced, most people thought it looked crude and a little ridiculous. Tony didn't care. He built 7 branches anyway. Now, how did they keep growing? Because one of the early decisions Tony made was genuinely a little crazy. His very first national marketing campaign involved buying advertising time during the Philippine Basketball Association, or the PBA Finals, as it's known. Now, if you're not Filipino, you need to understand something. Basketball in the Philippines is not just a sport, it's a religion. The PBA Finals is to Filipinos basically what the Super Bowl is to Americans. And here was Jollibee, not a nationally known brand at the time, barely a handful of restaurants buying a Super Bowl ad. The risk paid off. Overnight, Manila woke up to what felt like a brand new chain. The lines didn't stop. By 1981, Jollibee had 10 franchised stores across the Philippines. The menu was set. The brand was growing. And then the Golden Arches arrived. McDonald's had, by this point, entered and dominated virtually every market it had ever touched. Japan, Hong Kong, the UK, Australia. Tony's friends told him to sell. His business advisors told him to sell. The logic was hard to argue with. How could a small Filipino chain with a handful of stores take on a multinational that literally invented the modern fast food industry? Tony had 2 options. He could sell Jollibee to McDonald's, cash out, retire early, nobody would have blamed him. Or he could become a McDonald's franchisee, which honestly wasn't that bad of an option either. A stable, respectable business, a proven global system, a comfortable life. Guess what? He said no to both. He later said this was a moment of truth, that if he had no hope, he would have sold. But he had a vision, and he wasn't going to go down without a fight. So here's what he actually did. He went on the offensive. Tony and his team got on a plane to America and spent weeks walking into McDonald's restaurants across the country, studying them from the inside. They were reverse engineering the entire operational system, the quality controls, the supply chain management, the standardized processes that ensured every Big Mac tasted exactly the same no matter where in the world you ordered it. Tony's chemical engineering background helped him approach the whole thing like a laboratory problem. Understand the system, identify your single point of genuine advantage, then optimize everything else around it. He came back home and built all of it into Jollibee, with one critical difference: taste. Specifically, Filipino taste. And here's where the story gets interesting for anyone who thinks that great businesses are just about operational efficiency. What Tony understood, and what McDonald's with its globally standardized menu fundamentally could not accommodate, was that Filipinos eat differently. Not slightly differently, structurally differently. First, rice. Filipinos eat rice with virtually everything, not as a side option, as a default. A fast food meal without a rice option isn't really a complete meal in the Filipino cultural sense. McDonald's global menu was not built around rice. Jollibee's was from day one. Second, flavor. The Filipino palate trends sweeter and more savory simultaneously than American or European palates. Centuries of Spanish colonial influence, Chinese immigrant cooking traditions, and indigenous ingredients had produced a culinary culture where a little sweetness in savory food isn't strange. It's almost expected, even comforting. McDonald's burger seasoning, calibrated for Western palates, tasted fine to Filipinos. Jollibee's slightly sweeter, slightly richer seasoning tasted like home. Third, merienda. This is a Spanish word that Filipinos adapted to mean an afternoon snack, and it points to something deeper about how Filipinos actually eat. The eating culture in the Philippines runs 5 to even 6 occasions per day rather than 3. A fast food chain that understood this would design its menu around smaller, affordable, snackable items people could grab between meals, not just full combo meals. Jollibee did exactly that. Items like the Yum Burger, the Peach Mango Pie, and the Palabok Noodles worked perfectly as a quick merienda stop, not just a sit-down lunch. The Jolly Spaghetti is the clearest expression of this entire philosophy. It comes with a sweet tomato sauce made with banana ketchup, diced hot dog pieces, and shredded cheese on top. No American or Italian restaurant has ever made spaghetti like this, but it tastes exactly like the spaghetti a Filipino mother makes for her children's birthday parties. And that birthday party spaghetti is one of the most emotionally loaded taste memories of an entire Filipino generation's childhood. You cannot put a price on that kind of product market fit. Then there's Chicken Joy, a Jollibee signature fried chicken introduced in 1980. Tony spent an enormous amount of time on this recipe. He and his team tested versions obsessively, looking for the exact marinade that hit the sweet-savory balance, a crust that stayed crispy, an interior that stayed juicy. He even brought in his sister to help crack the formula when the development process stalled. It took years, and when they got it right, it became the foundation of everything Jollibee would eventually build internationally. Slowly, and against all reasonable expectations, it worked. By 1984, just 3 years after McDonald's arrived, Jollibee was already outselling McDonald's in the Philippines. By 1989, Jollibee became the first Filipino food chain to break 1 billion pesos in annual sales, roughly $50 million at the time, a milestone McDonald's Philippines had not yet reached. By 1993, Jollibee listed on the Philippine Stock Exchange, raising serious capital for the first time and signaling to the Philippine business community that a homegrown food company could compete with a global multinational and win. Today, Jollibee controls roughly 65% of the Philippine fast food market. McDonald's sits at around 15%. That outcome is one of the most remarkable results in the entire history of the global food industry. Tony's strategy wasn't really a business strategy in the conventional sense. It was a cultural strategy. He won by knowing his customer more deeply than his competitor ever could. But here's a question that should already be forming in your mind. If hyperlocalization is Jollibee's superpower, designing every product for a specific culture's exact palate and emotional memory, what happens when you try to take that brand somewhere else? Somewhere without a Filipino palate and any of the cultural DNA that made the whole thing work. Because what happened next when Jollibee tried to take that success beyond the Philippines to the United States almost destroyed everything it had built up until that point. Every time I try to dissect how a great company was built, there's a pattern that keeps emerging, and hopefully you're starting to see it too. The founder's vision matters more than almost anything else. Tony, the founder of Jollibee, declared that he was going to build the biggest food company in the world. Take a guess at how many restaurants he had when he said that. 5. Just 5 restaurants. And he said what he said. But of course, beating a global multinational giant on your home turf is one thing. Going truly global is a whole other challenge. And from our research, Jollibee definitely made their fair share of mistakes getting there. Let's start with their first big failure. It's 1993. Jollibee had just listed on the Philippine Stock Exchange, raised serious capital for the first time, and they've already beaten McDonald's at home. All that's left to do is take Jollibee global. So Tony does what any ambitious founder would do. He hires a professional, someone with real international experience, someone who's done this before. Enter Tony Kitchener, an Australian executive who spent 14 years running Pizza Hut's Asia Pacific operations out of Hong Kong. On paper, exactly the kind of seasoned global operator Jollibee needed. What happened next, though, is one of the most fascinating and painful chapters in Jollibee's history, and almost nobody outside the Philippines knows about it. Kitchener walked in and immediately decided that Jollibee had an image problem. To go global, he argued, the brand needed to stop looking like a scrappy Filipino chain and start acting like a world-class multinational. So he remodeled the international division's offices, introduced a formal dress code. Managers now required to wear ties. And critically, he declared the international division completely separate from the Philippine operations, cutting it off from the R&D, the recipes, and the operational expertise that had made Jollibee what it was. Then he launched what he called a plant the flag strategy, rapid simultaneous expansion into as many markets as possible, as fast as possible. Singapore, Taiwan, Indonesia, the Middle East, all at once. It was a disaster. Singapore failed, Taiwan failed, and here's the detail that should have been the loudest warning sign of all. Taiwanese customers simply didn't like the sweet spaghetti. Indonesia ran into partner conflicts. The Middle East was poorly executed with the wrong locations and the wrong partners. The international division was burning cash, creating internal conflict between Kitchener's team and the Philippine operations, and generating almost no sustainable revenue. By November 1996, Tony had seen enough. Kitchener left Jollibee in 1997. Now, to be fair, Kitchener's plant the flag approach was actually a standard international expansion playbook for the mid-1990s. He basically did what any seasoned corporate executive would have done, and it might have worked for a globally recognized brand like Pizza Hut, where customers already know what they're walking into. The problem was that Jollibee wasn't Pizza Hut. Outside the Philippines, nobody had heard of it. And by cutting the international division off from the Philippine operations, the people who actually understood the food, the culture, and the emotional DNA of the brand, Kitchener was trying to export a product he didn't fully understand. Strip away the Filipino identity, and you just have another mid-tier fast food chain with no particular reason to exist in markets already dominated by McDonald's and KFC. So you would think that Jollibee learned their lesson here, but it would later turn out they didn't, because just 2 years later in 1998, Jollibee tried America, and the opening looked incredible. The first US location opened in Daly City, California, a city just south of San Francisco with one of the largest concentrations of Filipino Americans in the United States. The line on opening day stretched around the block. People had been waiting for hours. For Filipino Americans who had immigrated in the 70s and 80s, Jollibee wasn't just a restaurant. It was a taste of a home they hadn't seen in years. So the opening was a genuine cultural moment. And here's what made the moment so powerful and so replicable wherever Jollibee went next. They didn't have to build their overseas customer base from scratch. History had already built it for them. There are roughly 10 to 12 million overseas Filipino workers scattered across the globe. The Middle East, Singapore, Canada, the United States. These are people who left the Philippines, often at enormous personal sacrifice, to work abroad and send money home. Those remittances account for roughly 7% of the Philippines' entire GDP, about 35 billion US dollars flowing home every single year. To understand how the diaspora came to be in the first place, I actually did a deep dive on this in our previous episode on the Filipino gig economy, so check that out if you haven't. The point is, the Filipino diaspora market is so big that you can build a legitimate global business just by serving them. But at the same time, I can see how Jollibee might have felt that the diaspora model had a ceiling still. There are only so many overseas Filipinos in the world, right? If your entire global expansion strategy depends on following a diaspora, you will eventually run out of diaspora to follow, which is exactly why when Jollibee got to America and saw the potential of the broader US market, the temptation to go mainstream was so hard to resist. And Jollibee, encouraged by the US reception, kept opening locations through the late 1990s and early 2000s, mostly in cities with heavy Filipino American populations. California, Hawaii, Las Vegas, Guam, and then quietly they made the same mistake all over again. They softened the Filipino identity, toned down what made them different, tried to position themselves just as another fast food option rather than leaning into being unapologetically Filipino. One example of this was palabok. Palabok is a traditional Filipino rice noodle dish, and it was renamed Fiesta Noodles for American customers. So if you had to take a guess, how do you think that approach worked? It didn't at all. And the Filipino American customers who had been their core and the ones who had cried on opening day could feel the brand drifting. The food quality had slipped from what they remembered back home. By 2005, the situation was genuinely dire. Jollibee had been in America for 7 years and had only 9 locations, and most of them were losing money. That's when they brought in Maribeth de la Cruz as general manager to assess the damage. Her mandate, as she later described it, was simple. Figure out if there's still a path forward in America, or tell us it's time to pack up and go home. She was given 2 years to make the call. And here's the part of a story that I think deserves recognition. While she was rebuilding a failing business in a foreign country with a 2-year deadline and the threat of shutdown hanging over everything, she was diagnosed with cancer. And she kept going. She eventually helped turn things around, and Jollibee didn't end up leaving the US market. And she also beat cancer. But the turnaround wasn't a walk in the park. For De La Cruz and Jollibee, it required going back to basics, bringing in 9 restaurant managers from the Philippines to restore the food quality, streamlining the menu, and refocusing entirely on Filipino American communities. It took about 2 years to stabilize. Not the breakthrough Jollibee had hoped for, but at least they stopped the bleeding. By the way, Maribeth de la Cruz is now the president of Jollibee North America, which is well-deserved. Here's the thing though, stopping the bleeding and stabilizing is not the same thing as expanding. From 2005 all the way through to roughly 2015, Jollibee grew in the US slowly and quietly. They were still a beloved niche brand for the Filipino diaspora, steady and sustainable but small. But the real breakthrough didn't come from a boardroom. It came from something Jollibee couldn't have engineered even if they had tried: social media. Starting around 2014, non-Filipinos started discovering Jollibee completely on their own. Food bloggers tried it, YouTubers posted reaction videos. At one point, Jollibee released its annual Valentine's Day ads in the Philippines, emotional short films in Tagalog made for a Filipino audience. And somehow, American YouTubers who couldn't understand a word of the dialogue were sitting in front of their cameras crying at a fast food commercial. By the time Jollibee opened in Times Square in 2022, people were camping overnight to be first in line, and most of them had never been to the Philippines. Then USA Today named Chicken Joy the best fast food fried chicken in America back-to-back years, beating Chick-fil-A, Popeyes, KFC, all of them. Jollibee hadn't changed. The world had finally caught up to it. And that's when something interesting happened inside the company. Because for the first time, the brand's new vice president of franchising in the US, a veteran who had worked at Starbucks and Panera Bread before joining Jollibee, said something in an interview that would have been unthinkable 10 years earlier. He said they were not a Filipino restaurant. They were a fried chicken restaurant. It's a subtle but important distinction. And it represents the moment Jollibee finally figured out how to talk about itself to mainstream America without abandoning what made it so special in the first place. Before, they were seen primarily as a burger brand competing with McDonald's, which they do, especially back home. But now they're positioning themselves as a premium fried chicken chain with an award-winning product in Chicken Joy that could go head-to-head with anyone in the category. And the numbers back it up. As of early 2026, Jollibee has 107 locations across the US, which after 25 years in the market might not sound like a lot, but here's what makes that number interesting. Each of those locations is generating an average of $4.4 million in annual sales. For a brand that most Americans have never heard of, that is a genuinely impressive number, higher than the average unit volume of many well-established American chains. On top of that, Jollibee has recorded 57 consecutive months of same-store sales growth. In an industry where most chains are struggling just to hold their numbers flat, that kind of consistency is almost unheard of. So what they've built in America is small but extremely profitable. And that profitability is exactly what gave them the confidence to finally launch their first US franchise program in 2025, with a target of 500 locations across the US and Canada by 2030. Which brings us to the part of the story I actually find most fascinating. Because everything we talked about so far, the Kitchener disaster, the near failure in the American market, the slow diaspora rebuild, the social media crossover, all of it was just a setup. The real Masterplan, the one that could take Jollibee from 107 US locations to 500 and beyond, was still being assembled. And it didn't come from the Philippines or America. It came from somewhere nobody expected. So up until now, one could argue that Jollibee's international success was mostly lucky timing. But the more they learned from their mistakes and chose patient, deliberate expansion, the more opportunities they had to create their own destiny. So how do you create your own destiny when you're flush with cash from careful expansion and growing revenue? Well, one way of growing your business is to acquire other companies that complement what you already do. In the business world, this is called mergers and acquisitions, or M&A. And starting in 1994, that's exactly what Jollibee started doing. Remember how I mentioned earlier that Jollibee's founder's vision was to build the world's biggest food company, not just a fried chicken franchise empire. Jollibee started building a portfolio of market-leading brands covering almost every major food category. And they started domestically. The first acquisition was Greenwich Pizza, a popular Filipino pizza chain in 1994. Chowking, a Chinese fast food chain, followed in 2000. Red Ribbon, a beloved Filipino bake shop, in 2005. Mang Inasal, a grilled chicken chain, in 2010. One by one, Jollibee was vacuuming up the competition at home and building the operational muscle to integrate and scale acquired brands quickly. Then, once they had proven that playbook domestically, they turned their eyes to the global market. Here's a fun fact. Did you know that Jollibee owns Smashburger, the American burger chain you've probably seen at airports and malls across the US? They started buying into it in 2015 and took full ownership by 2018. Though honestly, Smashburger has struggled under Jollibee's ownership and hasn't turned a profit yet. I guess not every acquisition works. What about the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf, the LA-born coffee chain founded in 1963 with over 1,200 locations across 24 countries? Jollibee acquired it in 2019 for $350 million. Then there's Timo Wan, the Michelin-starred dim sum restaurant that originated in Hong Kong, now fully owned by Jollibee as of 2024. Or Highlands Coffee, Vietnam's most popular cafe chain. It seems like they're taking over companies from all these different countries that really have nothing to do with each other. A fried chicken company buying a coffee brand and a dim sum restaurant? But stay with me, because their next move is where the strategy starts to reveal itself. And it involves a country that most people would never connect to a Filipino fried chicken chain, South Korea. In July 2024, Jollibee paid $238 million for a 70% controlling stake in Compose Coffee. At the time, the biggest acquisition in Jollibee's history by store count. Now, if you've never heard of Compose Coffee, that's okay. Most people outside South Korea haven't. But inside South Korea, it's the third largest coffee chain in the country with over 3,100 locations by 2026. Which means Compose Coffee has more stores in South Korea alone than Jollibee has in the entire rest of the world combined. It's 100% franchised, high margin, debt-free. And it has a particular appeal among younger Korean consumers, exactly the demographic driving K-food's global popularity. Then came the next move. Jollibee went after 노랑통닭, translated literally as yellow chicken, one of South Korea's most popular fried chicken chains with over 700 locations and a signature ultra crispy style that has broad domestic appeal. The deal was estimated at around $100 million, and Jollibee was selected as the preferred bidder. They even signed the memorandum of understanding, and then it fell apart because of bird flu. Avian influenza in Brazil disrupted chicken imports into South Korea and sent raw material costs spiking. Jollibee wanted a price reduction to reflect the new risk. The sellers wouldn't move. Deal dead. Now, here's what's interesting. A less committed company would have taken that as a sign. Maybe Korea is too complicated, maybe the timing isn't right, etc. Jollibee did the opposite. Just 2 months later, in February 2026, they came back and acquired Shabu All Day, South Korea's leading hot pot chain, for $87 million. That tells you something important about how serious this Korea strategy actually is. A Korean fried chicken acquisition is likely still on the table, just with a different brand or the same one at a different price. And when you understand why, the whole Masterplan snaps into focus. Turns out, South Korea has one of the most sophisticated and competitive fried chicken industries in the world. Over 50,000 fried chicken restaurants in a country of 52 million people. That's roughly one fried chicken restaurant for every 1,000 South Koreans. The Koreans have spent decades perfecting fried chicken at a scale and level of innovation that no other country has matched. If you want to understand the global future of fried chicken, you study South Korea. And Jollibee isn't just studying it. They're buying their way into it. But there's a bigger reason for their obsession with the Korean market. You see, Korean culture has gone global in a way that feels almost unprecedented. K-pop, K-dramas, Korean skincare. What started out as a niche cultural curiosity has become one of the most powerful cultural export machines on the planet. And where Korean culture goes, Korean food follows. In 2025, the South Korean government surveyed 11,000 consumers across 22 major cities worldwide and asked them, what is your favorite Korean food? The number one answer for the fourth consecutive year was Korean fried chicken. Not kimchi, not bibimbap, not Korean barbecue, fried chicken. Think about what that means. There's a global consumer, young, social media savvy, already primed by years of K-pop and K-drama, who has been culturally conditioned to find Korean-style fried chicken cool and worth seeking out. That consumer is in the United States, in Europe, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East. They're everywhere. And here's the part that should make every Jollibee competitor nervous. Korean-style fried chicken, known for its ultra-crispy double-fried coating and sweet spicy sauces, operates in a very similar flavor universe to Filipino fried chicken. Both lean sweet savory. Both prioritize crispiness. So what Jollibee realized is that the K-wave was doing for fried chicken globally what the Filipino diaspora had done for Jollibee locally, creating a pre-built, culturally primed customer base already open to the exact flavor profile Jollibee had been perfecting for 50 years. Jollibee didn't have to change its chicken. The world was changing to meet it, and now they are making moves to get ahead of the change. In September 2025, Jollibee launched a Korean barbecue fried chicken in the US. Chicken Joy, hand-dipped in a Korean gochujang glaze. That went viral. Now, that's a company that understands exactly where the flavor trends are heading and is quietly pulling its own product in that direction. And by acquiring Korean companies, Compose Coffee, Shabu All Day, and possibly a Korean fried chicken brand if the right deal comes together, Jollibee is buying a seat at the table inside one of the world's most sophisticated food markets. South Korea is where fried chicken innovation happens at the highest level. The double frying techniques, the sauce development, the franchise operational systems, the supply chains, all of it is being refined and iterated at a speed and scale that no other country matches. Think about what that means for a world-class fried chicken product like Jollibee's Chicken Joy. Imagine what happens when that product gets refined by Korean operators who have spent decades inside the most competitive fried chicken market on earth. That's the real long game, not just riding the Korean wave, becoming better at fried chicken because of it. What's fascinating about the Korean strategy to me is that it's not just an acquisition play, it's a platform play. Jollibee is assembling a connected portfolio, coffee, fried chicken, hot pot, across the fastest growing food culture in the world, with an explicit goal of using that Korean credibility to open doors in markets where Filipino branding alone wouldn't get them through. It's the equivalent of diaspora strategy, but instead of following Filipino people, they're following Korean culture. And Korean culture right now is going everywhere. But even that isn't the final move, because in January 2026, Jollibee announced something that genuinely surprised financial analysts and made the company's share price jump over 14% in a single day, the biggest jump in more than 5 years. They announced plans to spin off their entire international business and list it on a US stock exchange by late 2027. That's a big deal because right now, Jollibee Foods Corporation is listed entirely on the Philippine Stock Exchange, which means that when international investors, I'm talking about the big funds, the institutional money that drives global valuations, want to assess Jollibee's global business, they have to look at it bundled together with the Philippine domestic business on a smaller exchange. The US IPO changes that. It puts Jollibee's international operations on the same exchange as McDonald's and Starbucks. It gives Jollibee access to the kind of capital that would allow it to accelerate everything. More acquisitions, faster expansion, more firepower for the fried chicken war in America. This is how companies that started as tiny local brands become global giants. But here's the tension I keep coming back to. Jollibee's greatest strength has always been knowing its customer better than anyone else in the room. They beat McDonald's in the Philippines because they understood Filipino taste. That hyper-localization was the whole game. But the Korean strategy, the US franchise push, the Wall Street IPO, all of it requires Jollibee to become something more universal, not just a Filipino brand. It'll be interesting to see if they can pull that off without losing what made them special in the first place. Which brings me to my last question. Can any other companies replicate what Jollibee has done? Honestly, I don't know. From my own experience as a founder, the most overlooked factor in building a successful global company is timing. Jollibee's rise wasn't just about great food or smart management, though it had both. It was built on two waves of luck that nobody could have predicted. The first was the 10 million Filipino workers scattered across the world by decades of economic history, who just happened to carry their love of Chicken Joy with them wherever they went. The second was the Korean wave, which just happened to be priming consumers worldwide for the exact flavor profile Jollibee had been perfecting for 50 years. Jollibee just had the wisdom to recognize both waves and the courage to jump on them. That being said, the countries and people who win over the long run aren't necessarily the smartest or the best funded. They are the ones who survived long enough to be ready for the next wave. Jollibee spent years being overlooked and written off, but they never gave in. They kept watching, and when the moment came, they were ready. I guess the wave doesn't care who you are. It just needs someone willing to ride it. If you found this video insightful and feel like you learned something, be sure to subscribe to Asian Boss and turn on the notification bell. Our data shows that only about 27% of you watching right now are actually subscribed to our channel. Because we put so much time and effort into our research, we really cannot upload on a fixed schedule. So subscribing and turning on notifications is the best way to help us beat the YouTube algorithm and grow our channel so that we can reach a wider audience and cover more authentic insights from Asia. Also, if you like getting business insights from Asia like this one and want us to cover interesting companies, let us know which ones we should do a deep dive on. You can even share some on-the-ground insights you might have to help with our research for the next video. The goal here is to build a real community of culturally curious people and future leaders who help power the content we create so that we can be the go-to source for authentic, non-political insights on all things Asia. I really hope you'll be a part of it. Of course, I'm Stephen Park. Thank you for watching all the way till the end. And as always, stay curious.